your
Oh,
session, right?
yeah, I'm starting. There we go.
Okay. So what I was thinking, well, so in terms of that reality TV, I do think it's really connected on because I think part of the reason reality TV came into play is it was potentially a way for people to get the promise of it was more raw access to reality, right? To the kind of intimate details of people's lives, to have like a, because there's a sense in whenever you're listening to a story that there's a manufactured element of of fiction. And I think
Mm,
we stopped trusting that fictional element to be in connection with reality at some point. And so this was a way of shortcutting that. I mean, there was a lot of economic reasons for why it came to be as well, which I think are related to technobabble too. But I think the reason it's had such a massive popularity is because it is this window into into the intimacies of people's personal stories, or at least it's a pretense into that, because you find behind the scenes that a lot of times producers are actually trying to like set things up in kind of deceptive ways for the audience. But something's going on there that I think is related to technobabble. um I guess one of the things I wanted to talk about was just like I think it's weird because this subject is something I've thought about for a really long time, and it sounds like it's something that's kind of possessed you for some time as well.
yeah.
How long would you say you've kind of been gnawing on this one, or it's like something in the back of your mind that you're trying to give words to?
So I so I thought of even the term technological babble. I don't know, probably like if I had to guess, 5 years ago, maybe.
Gotcha.
And and then that's just like when it was formed enough to put into a word. The stuff underneath it had been, I'd been thinking about for a really long time, and I don't know. It's really so long ago now, and I've been thinking about it so long and talking to you guys about it so long. I can't even remember what how it started.
Oh, really?
To tell you the truth, no.
There wasn't
Um,
like a book or um, some thinker that you were in touch with that kind of.
no, no, and I haven't even really thought about it. Man, I should really. That would be an interesting thing for me to. I'll think about it for a while and get back to you on if I can remember what it even began. The way my mind works is so weird that I don't that I'd have to really think about it for a while to try to piece it back together. But it's more of like a. I think to me it's really connected to. It's not like a grand. It's not meant to be like a grand theory of everything, but it's very connected to my general disposition to always. I'm always trying to see the way Rob Bell says it is the thing behind the thing behind the thing, or the thing that's the spirit that's underneath unifying all sorts of things, or like the thing that nobody's paying attention to, the water we're swimming in. What's the
Yeah.
and I think that's a lot of it, and I think it really became. Some of it probably has to be tied into Rupert Sheldrake stuff. I got into Rupert Sheldrake, I don't know, a long time ago. It was probably around that time or probably a little bit before then. And I really do think Rupert Sheldrake is such a fundamental thinker in the world today. Like he's such a um, underutilized thinker. And it was almost maybe before I even, which I think is really connected to the stuff that Peugeot talks about with like pattern. And I kept seeing it was probably connected to that and even the space trilogy. I think I started to see the idea of patterns and spirits that are underneath these material manifestations that keep coming up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think once I started to see these patterns, I started seeing them very transcendent of our modern kind of identitarian categories. And so like I would see a really easy way to say it would be like in modern American politics with like Republicans or Democrats. I started to see like, oh, we don't really have a two-party system. It's just a one-party thing with two different names, and they're playing off each other. But really, it's about a power game, just keeping power centralized in this certain group. So it's the same spirit, but we're calling it something different.
Oh,
And then I started seeing that in religion in a lot of different places, of just being like, oh, I don't think these things are really any different. We're just calling them different things.
yeah.
And I think that's the idea that started rolling it. And then at some point, uh, technology got brought in. I mean, I've always been a little bit of I've been inclined to be more of a Luddite. I mean, I'm kind of a romantic where I like will romanticize the Amish or like being a hermit or something, you know? And then I think the more that I got into it and thinking about it and even understanding what technology is, which I think slowly over time I got language for through like Jacques Ellul and Craig Gay and some of these people, that Rupert Sheldrake, I started to see like what technology is and what it does. It started connecting all these things, and really it's probably connected to just broad ideas of diversity, like ideas like unity, or like unity amidst diversity, and the idea of, even it's these broad patterns, like even in an ecological system, like the
Yeah.
reason that ecological systems are robust is they're diverse. If you start ridding of diversity, and that's what technology does too. Technology just the reason it works, and even like mass production, is because you just repeat sameness just over and over and over and over and
Yeah,
over.
yeah, that is definitely part of it. It's like the copy paste kind of culture. Um,
That's how you can mass produce things. You can't mass produce things that are different.
well, all the economic incentives have definitely been in that regards, right? You get the home run by having this thing that the idea is cheap, and then you can copy paste it a million times, and or a billion times, and you make a lot of money that way. What's funny is like I'm almost coming to the opposite way. Like I hear what you're
Mm.
saying about like coming from like the Luddite perspective. I feel like I was more of like a huge fan of technology growing up, and I don't know if you remember Wired magazine. You ever read that?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not
Yeah.
old.
So
I remember the name.
like back in the '90s, it was a really cool magazine actually. Like it was much more weird, and it was kind of all about what was cutting edge and what was changing and there was a huge cultural swell of kind of like this kind of hippie make the world better kind of drive that was underlying the internet and just all these emerging platforms that were going to democratize power, and all these things.
Mm.
I saw the I mean, I could see already, like, and I was like maybe in high school in the '90s, thinking this way, like that there was a coming future in which um, the nerds would be on top to some extent, right? That the people who had who understood this stuff and were like loved it were going to have disproportionate amounts of power.
Mm.
But I saw it more in a positive way, and I've seen it's not gone that way. It had that potential, but it's taken all these left turns. So I've always seen like this potential for this kind of glorious city on a hill,
Mm.
and I've seen it go this other direction. Um, so like a lot of my early inklings of this thing, which I don't think I would even thought of giving it like a name like Techno Babel would be until maybe like sometime in the last you know, 5 to 10 years, but like I feel like I've been at the edges of this for like 20 plus years, just working in
Mm.
technology and seeing, okay, here's where technology is missing. And but and seeing that the solutions to it are also, in some sense, technical, because I think
Mm.
part of what's happened is all these layers of technology is what's happening is they're separating us from each other, and they're also separating us from the truth. But I don't think technology necessarily does those things. I think it can also, I mean, we've seen, like, just in terms of like Paul's community and things, how it can do the exact opposite. Like across extreme distances, it can make a community out of like just some ideas and words. They can coalesce and form, um, which I think is interesting. And I don't know. I think I've always had like ideas about ways in which that could be done. Um, and specifically like with all the, like the Amazons, Facebooks, Googles, et cetera, like they tend to look at the future of technology as being kind of machine oriented, and like it's all about, you have this bunch of people that are just really phenomenally skilled at efficiency at like a machine level of like ones and zeros.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they were able to build these like ginormous applications that scale to a global scale, which is, it's not a an easy thing to do. I mean, people come sometimes trivialize it if they don't understand it, but I mean, there's a real amount of effort that's gone into it. But as a byproduct of that is a kind of a feeling that these machines are our future. And so what happens is that, man, you have this kind of this the machines are on a pedestal, and humans, it's kind of like the Matrix. Like we're like these little things that are there to donate our time and attention to feed the machines.
Yeah,
Uh,
but on an economic scale, because it's really
right.
become that. Like, yeah, it's not so much just like from a power energy thing. It's more from like a economic level, because that is the most uh, sought after commodity now is
Human time and
information.
attention.
Yep.
Human time and attention, but the human time and attention for these big companies, Facebook, Google, et cetera, is really like they value our attention at like fractions of a penny per minute. Like they'll waste all this time of yours and get a fraction of a penny out of it, and it's a good transaction for them. But if you look at the math, it's making us impoverished as a culture, right?
Right.
Because it's like, but there was, I don't know. I mean, serendipity isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it can lead you into all kinds of paths that are unexpected and good. But it's also done this weird thing where it's trained our brains to always want something novel and and different and entertaining, like now, like literally, I think people's attention spans are so split from this need to do it, right this second. And that's, I don't think we're even beginning to comprehend, the effects of what that's doing, um, to our consciousness, the ways in which, like, I can't even listen to my friend tell a whole sentence without me starting to think about, what am I doing later today? Like this kind of slipping of consciousness is like built into, it's built into like how we spend a lot of our time.
So yeah, that's a little bit of a struggle, because I know the way that I would, for me, relate to that um, is like, even so I'm a part of this local book club, but reading, particularly if I'm at home, if I go somewhere else or it's nice outside and I go to a park or go sit in the cemetery or something, it's I can read. But if I'm just sitting at home, I have a really hard time reading. It's
Yeah.
really difficult for me, because I can I can talk to somebody like you. I can listen to a podcast. I can play music. I can watch a YouTube video. And there's this infinite amount of things that is vying for my attention. And I almost wonder if it's too. I'm reminded one of the really important quotes I think in all this is, and I had heard this, but then I looked it up, and it's so profound. I need to go back and read it again. But when Socrates was talking about his lament of literacy, and he was
Yeah.
saying, like, when we all become literate, when we all have this technology of books and math, and being able to write. I mean, that was an early technology before. It wasn't books because we didn't have books yet for the printing press, but even writing and people becoming literate at all. He said this will affect our memory. And so like our habit, that's one of the things that Craig Gay gets into in his book, and Rupert Sheldrake has talked about a lot too, is that technology, I think fundamentally, ontologically, one of the things that it is a trade-off of expediency for skill. You
Hmm.
lose certain skills for expediency, and it's always, and I don't think my natural impulse is to think that's a bad thing. I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing, but I think we don't often think about that. So like even our abilities to tell stories and remember ancient stories and to remember ancient myths and just to memorize long form poetry and stuff like that is really decreased. Our ability to navigate in the world because of Google Maps is hugely decreased. Our ability to guide ourselves by the stars, and those are all disconnections from the real world
Yeah.
because of technology that allow us to do things more quickly. And I think that's just native to what technology is. And then I think you have to ask yourself, like, part of me, part of my fear, I guess, or concern is that that's inherently, technology is almost like inherent. I don't know if this is the right way to say it. It's almost inherently like a practical Gnosticism. It like divorces us from the real material world, and we become more and more isolated all the time. And I think like my inability to read a book is just like a modern form of that. Um, and so I don't, and this, I guess that gets into my idea of Babel, and that gets into my idea of like what I think is potentially going, and this is not going to be a popular thing to say, but like, I'd love your thoughts on this, of what's even happening with like coronavirus. But I do think that when you start to get rid of diversity and the world becomes global and everything's centralized and everything is connected, and there aren't like little micro ecosystems and micro social systems and micro cultures, and everything is just one thing, I think mass spreading biological uh, diseases and problems is an issue. Thinking and war is an issue.
Yeah.
Because like that's all. If
Well,
you
the
really,
virus issue, I think, is mainly it's a connectivity issue. Like we've never been more physically connected to the
right,
world.
yeah,
In terms of like somebody can get from China
right,
to to California like that, and then
yeah,
once they get there, they're interacting with people that have come from Europe, that have come from every continent on the globe, and they're all rubbing shoulders, and then they go back to where they came from, and which is good and bad. Like, so they, whatever good things, ideas, microbes that they pick up, they spread
yeah.
everywhere, and whatever bad ideas and microbes they pick up, they spread everywhere too.
But then, so the idea of Babel, though, is that we are, through our tools, through our intellect, through our uh, like, what's the word? Ingenuity. Is that a word? How come that sounds really stupid right now? Doesn't sound like a word.
It, like in terms of like that's like a French word, isn't it?
I don't know. It doesn't sound right now. Maybe it's probably because I'm not saying it right. But through all those kinds of things, we're trying to build a tower to reach to the heavens. Another
Yeah.
way to say that is we're trying to use tools to manipulate our world,
Yeah.
to control it, to get the ends that we want, which is the same thing to me as like Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost. I mean, it's all the same spirit. But my fear is that I think this is the idea and the motif of what Babel is, and floods and inbreaking um, of releveling of things. Is God says, listen, that's never what you were supposed to do and what you're supposed to do, and you're going to end up killing yourself. And so God, in his judgment and mercy, only allows things to go so far before there's a releveling.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because, like, yes, okay, there's the negative sense of this kind of confusion of languages that gets built in with technology because of the ways in which language becomes kind of overly specific, and you see this proliferation of all this jargon and all these kind of, yeah, and it's even hard for me in that to distinguish what's good and bad, like in
Mm,
terms of like, this extra capacity to describe in granular detail, is there's a good aspect and a bad aspect in terms of there's just so much knowledge. It's like you end up see the problem I see all the time in my sphere, and I was dealing with this on a call today, is just you end up with situations where there's the level of complexity is so great that it can't fit in any one person's head.
right.
Once that happens, nobody can own it, nobody can direct it, and it kind of has this kind of out of control careening car bit where, like, it'll kind of, you can kind of knock it back onto the road, but it's just going to go off in another direction. You lose this, it loses any sort of elegance or beauty or cohesiveness to these different parts.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you'll have a problem where, at a technical level, like I'm working on this problem where there's like basically three interacting parts that need to work together well. And you solve a problem in one of them, and then the people like, all right, it's fixed, and then it's like, actually no, because everybody's testing their own little thing separately from everything else. And so I'm the person who gets to see the customer's perspective of, still doesn't work. You may have fixed your little thing here, but the nobody, because of the ownership is at these individual levels, nobody thinks, oh well, how does what's the cohesive picture of this look like?
Yeah.
And it's a complexity issue, because why did those people get assigned their own little role? Because that was the bit of complexity they could handle. So it makes sense from that perspective. But then um, now you have to put in all these meta rules for how those things interact that I don't think we're just not good at. And I think, but whatever transitional phase we are in civilization, that's where we're at, is how to, how do we get people to interact with in a good manner with each other, in a unified manner. And I mean, that's the bad thing and the good thing about this virus, is that in some sense we have this external force that's like forcing us to be like, you got to get it together, and you got to do it soon.
Yeah.
This isn't like a thing you can put off forever, because if you can't coordinate on these levels, we already are, like, as humanity, we are some sort of organism together.
Yeah. So I have a just a couple, like, I had a couple thoughts and statements I want to throw out of just things I'm thinking, and then I have a question for you. So what you were just saying, like, what's interesting is, like, the answer to this virus, right? A lot of governments have been saying is for us to quarantine. And if you think of that almost like, or social distancing, and if you think of that in like Pageauian terms of centers and peripheries, the answer with this then is for us to stop our individual spreading and expansion and distance with the world, and come closer into these local units, more local,
Yeah.
less spread out, and more bring everything back to the center more. So that's kind of like a big spiritual thing. And then I was thinking, as you were talking about complexity, and even issues that you're dealing with in work and like this 3-tiered system, and it's so complex and so big that we can't even hold it into our mind. But I think this gets into a couple things of like what Jordan Peterson has said, a lot of his the almost infinite complexity about the world, and so therefore the necessity of hierarchy, because there's infinite facts, there's infinite information, so we need hierarchies. But then also the idea that Peugeot said, right, that this is what's hard, I think, about a knowledge and information centric world, is that if the expression of the infinite is also infinite, if there really is infinite information, then when you try to develop systems and tools and ways of then controlling that information to get desired outcomes, the problem is that you're doing that based on your salience hierarchies, and you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah.
you can't necessarily anticipate ramifications of what you're doing, because a lot of times that's my thing, is like we're trying to fix things that are the effect of what
That's
we've
why.
created.
Yeah, that's why it becomes so important that you have some things that are at the top of everybody's hierarchy.
Yeah.
Like where truth is such a high value, it's at or near the top for everyone. So at least we can coalesce around that. And I think that's what's been lost.
I think that is true. So then my question, like, I just wonder how this strikes you, would be like, how ought man, I mean, you could answer it at a couple levels. How ought mankind and how ought you, interact with our world, or how should we manipulate the world to our desired ends? Like, what should be the way that we think about that? Because that's what I would argue the modern man is doing, is like we're doing that on just like a freak out exponential level.
Yeah. I think the manipulation part is less interesting. Like specifically how we do it is less interesting to me than a better articulation and definition for what those ends are. That's the thing that's I think is consistently swept under the rug. Um, there's kind of an assumed trajectory for things that never gets spelled out in any definition, and I think that's something that has to be worked on.
But you can do that
Because
in a really deceptive way, right? Because this is what I was talking about before with patterns, is that you can call yourself a Republican or you can call yourself a Democrat. You're doing the same thing. You
mhm,
can call yourself a Christian, you can call yourself an atheist, but underneath it, in my opinion, you have a fundamentally same worldview. And your ends, you think your purported ends and your desires are different, but welcome to self-deception. I don't think they are.
right,
But this
right,
is why I say Rhett and Link have the same, and I think they had the same functional worldview as Sam Harris. They just used religious language.
yeah. I need to drop here, but
Oh,
it should be pretty short. Are you able to pick back up in like maybe 20-30 minutes if
yeah, probably. So, my children are having a quiet time, because that's one of the things that centers us from being crazy, being at
yeah,
home all the time. And
nice.
then after that, they'll be watching Spanish Netflix. So,
Fun. Okay, so I'll just hit you up afterward and see if you're available then.
all right, cool. Sounds good, man.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Re-recording. Look at how easy that is. Wow.
Where were we trying to remember what we left off at? You had
All right. Yeah. Good. Good. What were we saying? It was something. Shoot. I don't remember.
well, how about this? How about we go through because I have your definition of Babel up here, and I wanted to go through it and kind of see
All right.
where we are at the same place and where we're different. Um, so the number one thing you had was individualism, and I think that really hits the nail on the head for me because um, I think there's a weird Western definition of the individual as being apart from everybody else. That is just, it really doesn't make sense. In David Bentley Hart's "That All Shall Be Saved," there he has a really great definition where he makes this point that like a person is in some sense a sum total of all their relations and associations, and so you can't the idea of an individual separate from those things is meaningless in some sense.
It's almost like I just had this idea. It's almost like conceiving of an individual as a part of a whole, or it's thinking of an individual as like the whole from within one, like a particular of the whole.
Hmm.
Those are two very different things.
Yeah, well, there's a sense in which the individualism of today is about what I want, what do I need, I can do whatever I want as long as I don't hurt anybody. And we don't have very good ways of defining where that hurt might come from.
It's an automatic assumed I don't know, not to derail it, I guess, but it gets into like the what I call the divided eye. It's seeing even the idea of like I can do whatever I want as long as I don't hurt someone. You're seeing it's like a built-in division between me and the other automatically.
Hmm. Yeah. So your next one is progress. And what I think of instantly when I hear that, I think of my idea of scientism,
Mm.
where it's like they're the s their eschatology in scientism is that we're going to this place where we're going to know everything. We're on our way. We're
Yeah.
going to have this exponential growth of knowledge necessarily, which will lead to a knowledge of everything. And also not just a knowledge of everything, but an ability to kind of manipulate everything and kind of bend it to our wills. And
Right.
like where Sam Harris says, we'll have a pill in the future that cures people from being murderers. And so why should we, you know, then we'll think very differently about the murderers now because it's all just some ones and zeros in your brain that we got to rearrange and it'll be fixed.
Right. And this is where I would say that I would say for myself, but functionally a Christianity that I was raised in has the exact same thing. Kind of like the right side of history. They just don't believe it's going to happen through scientism and material, um, like this material progress where all of a sudden we're gonna figure out all the facts of reality and then be able to, once we know all that stuff, we manipulate the world to our desired ends. The Christian response is like once we know all the right theological facts and information, then we'll be able to, through knowledge, through understanding, through conscious understanding, we'll be able to manipulate the world and other people. It's the same spirit. It's just using different
Yeah.
categories, I think.
Yeah, and this also gets into like C.S. Lewis's idea of chronological snobbery and
Mm,
this assumption of something because it's newer is necessarily better,
right.
um, and that it has arrived at something. And so along with that assumption, I think comes um, a sort of invisibility towards the sorts of costs that we always pay for anything new, right? There's always, I work at a software company, and there's always something better about the thing that's new, but there's always certain costs associated with it. There's usually never a free lunch. If only and even if it is better, you still have the cost of the user has to learn new features, new stuff. Like it's like there's at least that cost, but then there's also this hidden cost of all the with that new layer of complexity, you've probably broken a bunch of stuff you're not going to find out about for weeks or months later. So,
Yeah. I don't it's just I think I don't know if this is related to what you were thinking, but it's almost like that. There's a couple things, and I go back to these things and talk about them all the time because I don't know of a better way to say them. But it's almost like that George MacDonald Lilith quote that I love about, like, the fact is no man understands anything, and you just think you understand them because if you're being used to them, they're right there by
Right.
you, and so
Right.
you have unavoidable interactions with them. But he said when we really acknowledge that we don't actually understand anything, we're just familiar with them, and our models, our mapping, make sense of them, and we conflate that with understanding. Once you get that, that's your first step toward the capacity of one day understanding. Like, that's the step
Yeah.
that I think most modernists never take. And Firas Zahabi, who's this like MMA coach, was on the Joe Rogan show, I think a long time ago, well, a year ago or so, but he was trying to get at this very point. And Rogan, you could just see it was just like, it was just not landing forever, because in their conversation, I probably sent it to you, where they were talking about woo. And he was saying everything is
Yeah.
woo. And
Yeah.
he's like, science is just the faith that what happened before will happen again. What he's essentially saying is, like, you don't understand it. You just see this repeated pattern and conflate that with understanding. You don't know what that is.
Yeah, and this is where this is another thing I've been thinking about a lot, is that there's something about this way of seeing the world that disconnects us both from the top and the bottom,
Yes.
and we're in this weird squishy middle. We can't see the assumptions we're relying on. Can't we can't really see again that our eschatology, what is the end of the story that we're moving towards, and there's this yeah, it's very strange, and we're in it's like the middle, this squishy middle is expanded too, in terms of, like, it's got all these layers built into it, but we have conceived of it as this kind of very flat thing, with the explaining things away, where it's all
Mm.
just, it's all in this one level of knowledge. And if it's true in knowledge, you can just see it right here, but that's not really how reality lays itself out. At any layer of reality, if you just scrape beneath the surface, there's another layer there, and another layer, and another layer, and we I don't know, we've there's this kind of, I don't know what it is, but it's like it's just a denial of that complexity. It's just sort of it's sort of anti-intellectual in a way,
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
using the jargon of intellectuals,
Yeah, that's why I found myself perpetually frustrated in different church environments where I went that were highly intellectual, because I would just be like, you guys are talking about all this stuff, but, like, you fundamentally don't understand it. Like,
Yeah.
you're talking about really highbrow intellectual things, but
Right. Right.
but you don't see, like, what's underneath all of it. And it's kind of like Paul is getting really close to it, I think. Particularly, I was watching a little bit of it this morning, but in his Brett, what's the guy's name? Salky, whatever, the
The new
Canadian,
guy, yeah, the Catholic,
the transubstantiation guy. But in
yeah.
talking about transubstantiation, they were going through the history of where that language came from. And they were talking about the nature of substance versus accidents, because what Paul kept saying is, like, he's talking about story, and what Paul will often say is, like, my story doesn't age, but my body ages. So that's the whole balance of what I
Mm,
always say biblically is, like, the perishable and the imperishable,
right.
spirit and the material, the flesh, heaven and earth, all these different ways the Bible talks about it. But then the the sacrament, what it is like, the substance is almost like the my kids are coming up. Hey, maybe close that door when you go in too. Not right now. My kids cannot agree upon the video to watch.
They wanted you to be the arbiter to
Yeah,
decide.
very often. This the other child wants to watch this, and I want to watch this. Can I watch it on something else? Talk about hyper individualism, right? Um,
Yeah.
but so they were talking about transubstantiation, and what the idea of it is that there's something, the idea of Christ being present in the Eucharist is that there is something unseen, that transcends the mere materiality, that
Right.
is real there. That's the sacramental worldview. And that's actually, I think, the iconic worldview, which is that, like St. Maximus was saying, and that Jonathan Peugeot talks about all the time, is there's a logi in everything, which is why in him we live and move and have our being, and nothing, we don't exist apart from God making us exist all the time. Nothing does.
Yeah.
And when when you start to view the world that way, I think this is what like Barfield is talking about, and I think of what even like Terrence Malick is trying to do in his movies. They're trying to transform the way that you see reality. And I think when you
Yeah.
start to see that like these eternal things are present in spiritual form and all these different iterations of the material thing, and that there aren't really these distinctions there. Like there are mentally, but they're not, and everything's combined. I don't know. There was a point of what you were saying that was really connected to that, but I lost it with
That's good. This stuff
child.
gets complicated. Um, so, and then another one of your points is technology as a defining characteristic. Now, I'd be curious, what is your definition of technology?
So this is where I think that Craig book, Technology in the Human Future, which I haven't read. Like Jen makes fun of me all the time because I don't read a lot of these books. I just get just enough of them. Like I get
Uh,
from them what I want, and then I'm just like, I don't need to read it.
yeah.
You know, like it's given me what I need. I can move on. But there's sometimes more in there. But he breaks up this idea. He says technology is kind of common to humanity. We've had it forever, and language in that sense is almost like a technology, although language is a little different. Language is a little bit more magical, mystical, mysterious. But technology is just anything that we use to, I should just get the definition, anything that we use to manipulate our environment.
Hmm.
But he says one thing about it is it always divorces us from the real to some extent. But then he puts in layers, like he puts in distinguishing categories between like um, tools. He has a category of like tools, and then
Hmm.
contrivances, and then like machine kind of technology. So there are these levels. And so like very, very basically, like a shovel or even like a rock, think like pre-Bronze Age, pre any like metallurgy. Like a rock is a tool to dig
Right.
something out, or like to hold a bowl, to hold food, or to hold water, a bucket, really rudimentary bucket. Those are all tools, but yet they are composed of natural things, and they are still very naturally connected to the world. And so then he gets in the idea of like a contrivance, which would be like um it's like a next level up, but it's still something that's very connected to the world. Like it doesn't, earth, wind, fire, water, it's still connected to that kind of stuff. So like a windmill
Right.
or like a water wheel, he said those are tools and that's technology, but it's still very connected to the world. There's only so much you can do with it.
Right.
You can't like exponential production increase, you can't do that. It's still very limited by natural factors. But then he says you start to get into like machine technology, like post-industrial revolution technology, gears, mechanisms, mass textile producing, and now we're in like that, but on a kind of silicone chip-based, computer-based level, which has globalized that to an even greater extent. And he says you start to get exponential increase with that.
Yeah.
And there's a very big difference between machine technology and contrivance technology.
Well, yeah. I mean, so I think, well, when I think about technology, I think about it very broadly, and I would even include language in it because language, we don't see the movements of language, but language is this thing that we use to manipulate the world, and we are in fact manipulating language in ways. Well, we're manipulating the structure of language over time as well. So I would even include that in my categories. But I think the thing about whatever technology is, there is like some element of multiplication or leverage, or like you were just saying, exponentiality, where you whatever, and what's being magnified is something from above in our attentions. Whatever your intention is, and sometimes
Hmm.
it becomes magnified, and sometimes in unanticipated ways. Um,
It allows you to take like a heavenly thing, an idea even, and incarnate that idea in a way that allows you to manipulate the material, the temporary, the perishable. So like use it, like I want to carry water from here to there. Well, I can use my hand, or I can just suck it out
yeah,
of the stream, or I can take a cup or I can fashion a bucket and I can carry more of that. You're taking an abstraction ideal and putting it into materiality to then to change to I think expediency is really connected.
right.
It makes things faster.
That's definitely part of it, is speed. What do you think? What do you think God thinks about technology?
I don't know, because so this is how I'd pull it all back to Jordan Peterson, and why I always find such resonance with Jordan Peterson is
Hmm.
Jordan Peterson has got fundamentally at some of the stuff that I think is most important to the modern world. Like tell the truth or at least don't lie. I think you almost can't get deeper practically than that, in my opinion. Like I think that's almost at the core of everything. He also, one of his rules is do what's meaningful, not what's expedient. I don't know that those things are disconnected. Lying is expediency.
Hmm.
Lying is a tool. You're trying to manipulate the world to get something that you want, and so then you're not telling the truth. You're using a
Right.
mental tool to manipulate the world. I don't I don't know. I mean, part of me that probably strives for balance and not being extreme would say that there's nothing wrong with expediency, but I don't know. There's something very deeply within me that almost thinks universally the faster road is worse. Like I don't know. I am
Oh,
very
I
leery of
totally agree.
expediency.
Well, I think like you're exactly right though, because the ways in which knowledge unfolds itself to you is always in a slower manner. Now, yeah, so like everybody knows, like there's a marked difference between mass produced bread and bread made by a baker by hand. There's
Right.
something there's uh there's something that is
Or getting
completely,
health by a pill, diet pills
yeah.
versus slow effort that's connected to character and responsibility and meaning. I mean, it's
And ultimately, I think what gets lost in the fast one is information. Information gets squeezed out. There's so much more, you know, details of things, and there's also time for it to kind of soak in and make its way into whatever the physical thing is in the more manual approach always. And really, I mean, what ultimately is affected is us, the person, the character, the person, whoever is doing the
mm,
thing. Whereas, like when I flick up on my phone and do five other things, I'm not really I can have access to all this information, but it doesn't really come into me in the same way.
you can't have that, yeah, Eucharistic embodied knowledge. Like it's very different. It's
Yeah,
like the difference between thinking that you can bake by reading a cookbook and making dough. Like
yeah,
it's a very different thing. Or it's like I was just thinking when you were talking, like even on a phone, like um the kinds of relational things that we have are back to even reality TV and the generational handoff, as Paul calls it, or how we're so disconnected and our relationships don't develop. Well, part of that is because we're so divorced from the world and in our individual isolation capsules due to technology that like we're like using Tinder, or we're catfishing people, or we're but like all of that is a projected image which you are which is bound to be used for deception, because you're not going to put you're going to curate all that. You're putting Instagram
Yeah.
filters on things. You're not putting out like the
I,
worst version of
I,
yourself.
yeah, and I think we know that there's something negative that's transpiring in a lot of these interactions, but there's this weird assumption that we can somehow keep that negativity at bay or distribute it wider in the world and it won't come back on us.
Yeah, well, it's ego.
Yeah.
I mean, we think we can hold fire close to our chest and not get burned. I mean, it's kind of like, and even what you were saying with like tech, I don't know what I think about technology being used to bring everything back in. Because even like the Paul Vanderklay community, this is something that I've had conversations with people about as his community expands. I am,
Well, I think here's how I think about it. I think it's either it has to, or we're gonna have a reset. Like
what do you mean?
I mean, the way that the speed at which there's so many things that have been like literally we have a planet. You couldn't if you take away the technology, literally like 90% of the people would be dead because
We're
that's just the
reliant
way
on it. We don't have skills anymore to live, right? I agree.
exactly. And this is at so many different layers. Even if like it used to be, for the most part, like say a country would be fairly self-sufficient. Nowadays, you just cut off global trade and
Right.
there's so many things that are made here that are only made here and
Yeah.
suddenly we can't get them anymore because we thought it was a good idea that they specialize in that and we specialize in this.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is, I mean, there's obviously, I mean, there's good things that come about from specialization, but there's obviously a big trade-off in terms of fragility of the overall system when you need some sort of circulatory system now to be up and operational all the time or you die. um, and again, this coronavirus is a big test of this, like whether it's very interesting. This could be a moment where we have common cause to think of ourselves as a collective entity, and we work together and put truth at the top of the hierarchy because lives depend on it. And so I don't know, it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out. I think part of the problem is, again, with the top of the hierarchy being this sort of propositional knowledge, and at the same time as there being this sort of explosion in the availability and we're actually creating new propositional knowledge all the time, even in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what we're doing right now. In some sense, we're trying to like plow beneath something and come back with a representation of it that we can communicate to one another in language
Right.
about,
Right.
right? And so
Yeah.
even that effort, right? And if we share this with people, like we're we're expanding that propositional knowledge reach as well. But there's this, along with that, and with propositional knowledge being so high in the hierarchy, is that people pretend to know things that they don't know.
Yeah. Or they either pretend or they think they know
They
things that
think
they
they
don't
think
know.
that is knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a very different thing. That's why I like the term Eucharistic knowledge. Like it's such a fundamental. I don't know. Sarah and Dave from the Discord. Sarah, who you know, but and then I don't know if you've interacted with Dave much, but he's an Orthodox guy, and they were talking recently about Alexander Schmemann's book, For the Life of the World, who's an Orthodox thinker. And his book, it's one of those things that keeps coming up. People keep bringing it. One of the first local Orthodox guys I met in the Twin Cities was just like, he reads that book every year. He said it just like changed his life. But a lot of it is about what I would call Eucharistic knowing. Like he begins, and I haven't read it yet, but from what I know of it, it begins with like talking about food and the necessity of eating, and kind of like the idea, he starts playing off this idea of like you are what you eat.
Mhm.
Like that is it's a deeply deeply true thing. Like even really early on in the development of medicine, like that's a, let medicine be, let
It's
your
so
food
it's
be
so
medicine,
true
and let your,
that we've forgotten.
yeah,
It's so weird, right?
No, absolutely.
I
But
mean, it
yet,
literally is what you are, what you eat.
right, right, absolutely. But I think there's part of us that still knows it, but we've gotten so abstracted that I think we forget things like that. And like that's what I don't this is a conversation because I love food ethics. So back to the whole food thing and globalization, like I used to tell people all the time, and I still believe this. Like if Christians ate ethically, it would change the world. Like I think we sit around debating all these ideas and we try to manipulate how this is why probably more than anything, one of the big illustrations of why I've moved Orthodox versus more Protestant is like I think habits and formation are more powerful than just telling people ideas.
Yeah, certainly.
Um, and I think that if we really ate food that was produced, it's so funny. Like one of the first guys, this is before I even got into a lot of my food ethics, like early on in my wife's marriage, but we had this, she was in her post-secondary studies and she had a guy in her class whose dad, they used to talk about him and, because he was just this funny guy because he wouldn't eat food, he said, unless it was made with love. So like, but it was a big deal in their family. And so like they'd go out to restaurants and he wouldn't, like a lot of times he wouldn't eat or he'd ask him all these questions. And we were just like, oh, that's such a crazy thing to say. Like, what does that mean?
Hmm.
Like food made with love. And we're just like made with like some grandma, the family recipe or whatever. And I think that's part of it. But I really do think like this is today we have like what's funny is like you'll talk to people about Paul in the New Testament. He said food, like he talks about food sacrificed to idols, and it's neither clean or unclean. But like if it's bothering your friend's conscience, don't eat it. But if it's not, go ahead and eat it. There isn't clean
Yeah.
or unclean. But in our modern world, we think like what's just funny is like we think that we have food that is no longer sacrificed to idols. Are you kidding me? Of course we have food
Yeah.
that's sacrificed to idols. We have food that's sacrificed to the idol of mammon
Yeah.
everywhere. And you think that's disconnected from like health and obesity and diabetes and immunities and your gut biome. Like you are what you eat. Like on every
Yeah.
level. But people
It's
don't
funny that,
they don't have a frame to see it.
yeah, a long time ago, this is kind of unrelated, but right before I kind of started my journey back into Christianity, I had this series, like it was like over a period of a month where I kept having these, I called them advice dreams, where it was like always while I was waking up in the morning and I would have this sense of like being told like to do something.
Hmm.
Very weird. Like, and I wasn't like living in like going to church or anything at that time. I was kind of like very agnostic about just the whole thing. But
Yeah.
I remember coming out of those experiences and being like, something's trying to talk to me, even if it's just my body or myself trying to talk to myself.
Yeah.
And the thing I kept one of the recurring themes was pay attention to how you feel after you eat something, and it made me realize how often you never do that. And at that
Yeah.
time in my life, I was really stressed out, and I was literally just going from thing to thing to thing. I was working like 50, 60 hours a week, traveling a lot, and it was just like this thing that came up out of nowhere, like just pay attention. And it just made me realize, that's something I almost you never do. You never go
Yeah.
like, and you think how back in the long, like, hundreds of years ago, like if you ate something that didn't agree with you, you knew right away.
Yeah.
First of all, because you were eating less things, period, but also because the the possibility of eating something that was poison enough to kill you was real possibility all the time.
Right.
Like, whereas now we've kind of programmatically mostly removed that, but if you thought about it, it probably is there in micro doses that are in our food supply that are growing all the time because it's below some threshold that we measure for whatever reason right now. It's not within our salience frame at the moment, so
Right.
we lost sight of it. But yeah, I do think that sense, and also what's coming up for me too, like you mentioned Eucharistic scene, but like just, how an understanding of the physical aspects of what you're doing with the Eucharist, and what's going on with that. And I don't know, it's very interesting. I don't really know what to make of it, but it's like this big question mark that I feel like I'm still wrapping my head around. And with those podcasts that Sarah shared recently, where they're all focusing on John, and John's gospel is so weird when you just compare it to the other gospels. It's just so strange. And one of the
Yeah.
big things is that where in the where would have been in the in the Last Supper, all this stuff about this is my body, eat it remembrance. I mean, that's all moved to John chapter 6.
Mm.
And it's just a very interesting little saga there, where he, that's where he does the whole thing. You have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, and then some of the disciples go away and stop following him at that point. I don't know, it's really interesting. Sorry, I didn't really have a point for that, but it's like this big thing in the back of my mind right now, which is like, how does this all play out, with food, and like the ways in which, like, grocery stores right now are all empty. um I don't know, seems to be something salient.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, the Eucharist, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting how all these things work. I don't know what the quote is of something of like a lot of isn't there some quote about remembering, like a lot of religion or life or faith or something like that is a remembering. um and I think it's a coming back to things like that. Was another thing that came up just connected to Eucharist in that transubstantiation talk with Paul, but they were talking about how oh shoot, what was it? But it was something in relationship to time, because that's the thing about the Eucharist too and all this stuff is we don't understand how all those things relate into time. And like oh, I think it's what they were talking about, a remembrance. Yeah, because a lot of, I don't know when that developed, if that was like sometime during the Reformation or post-Reformation, it was do this in remembrance of me, where
Right,
it was
right.
thought of as just like yes,
Psychology of it all, instead of
right.
there's nothing going on really substantially that's physical in
Right.
nature.
It's just a remembering, but then he was saying within Catholic theology that it's thought of as not just a mere remembrance, but it's thought of as like an active, present, right now participation in in Christ. And that's what I was reminded too within, because that's very much I don't know if that applies to all of like a Catholic mass. I would think it probably would, not just to like the Eucharist, but very much within Orthodoxy. Like that's the idea. One of the reasons Orthodoxy I think is so weird to people is as a liturgy is meant to be, the whole thing is meant to be about everything. It's all meant to be about heaven. It's a participation in these time transcendent things right now. There's like, I just went to a class, our church is going through this thing, theology on Thursdays, where we were going through creation last week and just reading through the Genesis accounts and the two different accounts and then relating that to the creed and how all those things work. And he was saying like even the dome in an Orthodox church, like that's meant to be the dome in creation. Like that's the firmament,
Yeah.
like everything. I was talking about this to someone on the Discord, maybe Paulina or something, but about how one of the things that I love about Orthodoxy, coming out of a very in my head theological, like get all the facts and information right tradition of Christianity, is it's not that Orthodoxy is like opposed to information and knowledge and propositions, but it's just like when you go to a liturgy, part of it is that it's not my tradition, but also it's just like there's one of my favorite things about it is it's overwhelming. Like there's no way I could possibly track what's going on, really. It's too much. Everything has meaning,
Yeah.
and it's thousands of years of meaning, like in everything that you're seeing, in the smells, in the change of the colors, in what they're doing with the lighting, when they're lighting the candles. Not only what he's saying in the sermon, everything about it, how everyone is orienting to themselves has so much meaning in it. My mind, one of the things I most love about it is my mind shuts off. And that's not like stemming out of it. Part of that is probably just me. That's not like saying an anti-intellectualism. I'm not saying like we shouldn't think about these things, but it's almost like I think of it as like a it's almost like what do they call those? Like a rehab. It's like a recovery thing for me.
Hmm.
Like I'm going there to recover from information addiction.
Yeah. How often do you go to do like the divine liturgy or whatever?
So I mean that's, they do that. The divine liturgies every Sunday, and then
Yeah.
they have a vesper service, because really that's another thing. They were just talking about that because Orthodoxy is still in the tradition of Judaism, really, where like the day starts in the evening. So Vespers is really like the liturgical beginning of the day. And then,
So people for Vespers, people show up at the church like at all those services,
yeah, well, yeah, fewer people do than for Divine Liturgy, but,
and do
and
they
there's,
do the Eucharist at Vespers as well?
no,
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 just
yeah.
okay.
But now during Lent, they have, so there's a lot more services during Lent, and I'm still figuring a lot of this stuff out. They have a lot of pre-sanctified liturgies. They'll have liturgies during the week that are pre-sanctified, meaning that they're like before the divine liturgy on Sunday, so like before the sanctification of the elements and all that happens. So there's all these different services, and then it's kind of funny because if you truly, I mean, if you truly practiced like the monastics do, which normal lay people don't do. I mean, there's you see, once you participate in a church for very long, there's various levels of how you're like, oh, those are the people that are at everything, and then here are the
Yeah.
people that are at most things, and then here are the people that just show up at liturgies, and then these are the people that just show up like right before communion on liturgies, and these are the people that show up like just during Lent and at Christmas maybe. So
Hmm.
there's all those levels. But like if you went to all the services of like a day within an Orthodox calendar, it's like 18 hours or
Oh
something.
wow.
I mean, it's like that's monastics, that's all they do is do the services, a little bit of work, praying and sleeping. Like that's all they do. um so I mean, it definitely can be a lot, and some of those things are truncated at times, and in different traditions, but there's a lot of it for sure. But it's,
And you go to it's an Orthodox Church of America. Is that what you go
yeah,
to? Yeah.
yeah. Which I was, yeah, that's an aside. I was just learning about the history of it. Our church in particular is interesting in Minneapolis because um, I always thought that the Orthodox Church in America came out of the Russian church, but I don't think that's exactly right. Our church is a little bit weird too, in that St. Mary's, where I go, was originally founded as it was a it was Catholic. It was a Catholic church of the Eastern Rite, so it was like a Byzantine Catholic church.
Huh.
So like in Europe, like post Charlemagne, I believe there were some Catholics in like Poland, Eastern European area that were kind of like on the border between Orthodox and Catholics, and the Catholics kind of, a lot of political stuff were going on, but they were reintegrated kind of into the Catholic Church, but they were given a few, the Catholic Church gave them a few things to do it. They were like, you can keep the Eastern Rite. So like the liturgy looks a lot like an Orthodox liturgy, but it's under the Pope, under the Catholic
Right. Right.
hierarchy. And so that our church was a Catholic church to begin with, but then and this is kind of famous, like I was talking to Andreas about on the Discord, within Orthodoxy, Catholicism, it was a beginning church. This is where all the ethnic stuff came up, but it was mostly like Slavic, Eastern European people. um, and they were reaching out to like the local bishop, I believe, the local Catholic bishop for some help. But because there were all these cultural things, because they were in America, he was just kind of like, I'm not going to help you. And so they were just sitting here kind of isolated from then like the larger Catholic thing. And they're like, what do we do? And so then they reached out to the Orthodox bishop in San Francisco, and he helped them and stuff. And so like the whole church converted to Orthodoxy.
Oh wow.
And then a bunch of churches actually in the US. And then so he's sainted now. His name is what
How
is
long
it?
ago was that?
That was like in the early 20th century. So like
Wow.
um Alexander, yeah, Toth. What is his name? Saint Alexander Toth, I believe. But and then he went around the whole US like converting a bunch of Eastern Catholic churches to Orthodoxy. And the Catholics were, and then I think a lot of the Catholics, like even Andreas, was just like, I don't think they really appreciate the local Catholic bishop that kind of started that cascade. you know. So anyhow, that's kind of where our church is, and so it's kind of an interesting church. It's become really, it has some remnants of a little bit of Catholicism, but it's pretty well Orthodox now. I mean,
In terms of the theology of the Eucharist, is that now are you a member of your church, or you're in the process of becoming like
yeah. So
catechized or whatever?
yeah, so me and the kids actually we became catechumens like a few weeks ago, officially. And the plan is my kids will be uh, baptized and then do like first confession and first communion and all that um, coming up here during Lent. I am not going to at this time because I'm just for various reasons just not going to do it yet. But I am a catechumen, so I'm like officially on the books, but yet not officially Orthodox. It's kind of in this liminal place.
Interesting. So do you go to separate special events, or do you like how what is?
So I go to everything. Like there's an interesting part within the divine liturgy that they talked about for a while taking out, but they keep it in because the Orthodox just don't change anything. They're like, we're not taking that out. But it's called like the dismissal of the catechumen, essentially, because in the early church, it's like if you imagine the really, really early church when paganism was really a big deal, and like even the Pauline letters talking about the Eucharist and or like speaking in tongues or anything, and he's like, you should do this while you're together, because if you do this around outsiders, they're going to think you're insane.
Yeah.
So like in a pre-Christian society, they built in this place which was called um, the dismissal of the catechumens. So there's a point in the Orthodox where they say like, let no catechumen remain, all catechumens depart, where they're like, leave, which is before the communion, because that's essentially why, like, we don't want the catechumens, and there's even in the
You can't
Eucharist
take communion as and
as a
that's
catechumen, right?
okay.
But also like um, during the Eucharistic creed, there's a section of like, I will not. What does it say? It's when you're out of the rhythm, it's hard to remember all these things. But it's like, I will not disclose essentially thy mysteries to thine enemies. Neither like Judas will I give thee a kiss, but like the thief will I confess thee. Have mercy on me, a sinner. But so like it's like I'm not going to talk about my mysteries, the mysteries of Christ to outsiders, because they wouldn't understand. Like they're going to think we're cannibals. Like it's a weird thing. So that was kind of the idea. Like you are a catechumen, you can't participate in this yet. Like you're part of this learning process um, to become Orthodox, then where you can participate. And so they would go off and do like their own catechumen training, where they would go through like the Gospel of John, and be learning all that, because that's why a lot of people think John was written, was almost like it's like a training gospel to
Yeah.
teach people as like an entry into the church. And so, but they don't really do that anymore because now we're in a post-Christian society. So they're like, there's really, what the practical purpose that served isn't even necessary anymore. They
Okay.
keep
So
it in the
you don't
liturgy.
leave, and you
No,
but do you take communion?
no,
Okay.
nope. You're not allowed to take communion, which is so like adult converts or even like my kids is different because if you're raised Orthodox, if you're cradle Orthodox, they would say you're baptized. I mean, I don't know when they do it. Maybe it's maybe parallel to like circumcision, like on the 8th day or something. I mean, you're baptized pretty early. You take first communion immediately after baptism, and then like so my I have a one of my kids
And
is
they call it baptism chrismation. Is that right?
so chrismation would be like if you are a Christian who is converting to Orthodoxy, but you've already received an acceptable Trinitarian baptism,
Uh-huh.
then you would just receive chrismation as opposed to being baptized,
Gotcha. Okay.
which varies on how the priest and would want to handle that depending on situations. Like I think I'll probably have to be baptized again when I become Orthodox, but
Yeah. It's curious. It's interesting, like that the Orthodox have been able to maintain, I don't know, or resist rather the kind of what all the modern things you would think that would make them want to like do this a lot faster and just get members in and all those things.
yeah, it's almost completely like that very thing, like almost kind of like that evangelical impulse
Hmm.
is very foreign to the Orthodox, just on
Yeah.
every level,
Right.
theologically, practically, everything. Like even
Well, it
us
reminds me more
going,
like the Jews, right? Where like
yes,
they say if you go to a rabbi and ask to become a convert, they're supposed to turn you away a few
yeah,
times because
yeah,
they will allow you to become a proselyte. So
yeah, that's kind of it. Like even the whole time we've gone to the church, it's so funny. I noticed that right away. Anytime we meet someone, the assumption is I'm Orthodox and that you've just moved to town and so you've started attending this Orthodox church. When I'm just like, no, we're not Orthodox. They're like, where do you live? And I'm like right here, like really close to the church. And there's like, what? It's just like it doesn't make sense to them, and they're like, "Oh, you're not Orthodox." Like, and they're always really welcoming and warm, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool."
yeah.
But it's not a phenomenon that happens a lot, even though our church has a lot of converts in it. Um, it's just not and they're very comfortable with slow. Like my wife, for example, is very much not ready to become a catechumen, not ready to like join the church or any of that. And their response to that is kind of like, slow's good. Like the Orthodox are very comfortable with slow,
Hmm. That's really cool.
you know.
Yeah.
They're kind of almost like, well, she sounds Orthodox. you know, like doing things really slowly.
And are most of the people in your particular congregation, or they have like some sort of ethnic connection to one of the other non-American Orthodox churches from the past?
Well, so there's a lot of that. Like this is well, most of the people, like I was saying, it's interesting. Like most of the original people came out of this. A guy was I need to get this history down better, but he was just telling me about it. They came out of like it's such a crazy they came I think it was in and I'm the geography and the history of of all of Orthodoxy is kind of new to me, so I'm figuring it all out. But so they were in like this small Eastern European country, and like they all almost came from like one village.
Hmm.
Like it's crazy. Um, and then they came over here, and like I was saying, they were Catholic, so they were like Byzantine Catholics, Catholics of the Eastern Rite, and so they were Slavic is the best way to say it because their their ethnic heritage like precedes modern geopolitical boundaries.
Right, right.
Like they came from people groups that were like before all that stuff. So like even and I was trying to figure a lot of this out. Like I think a lot of them came from maybe Slovakia, they were saying. So
Hmm.
like there's a some people groups that were just like Poland, Slovakia, maybe into like Romania, Ukraine, potentially, but like they were of just this particular people group. Um, but it's interesting. Like they can, all this stuff is, there was this girl that was last week in their kind of like bookstore, which is like less books. Think like a Christian bookstore, but like replace 90% of the books with like jewelry and icons and like stuff that aren't just books.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and they were, she had all these eggs. She like paints these eggs, and some of them are wooden, some of them are like real eggshells. But she was talking to me about all these eggs, and these intricate designs. they take tons of time, they're kind of expensive. And she was saying, like, she was describing to me, like, these are particular to this one little village, and sometimes they'll take them to the state fair, and there'll be other people there, and they're like, they're judging my eggs based off of these eggs. And I'm like, well, that's a totally different kind of egg, because that was from this other village. It's like
Yeah. Niche.
such a specific, ingrained, ancient. It's just like they're, for me, who like came out of, it's not just evangelicalism, but even like my ethnic heritage. Like I don't even know. People talk about like 23andMe and like getting your genetics mapped and like figuring out. And that's just the thing, truly. Like for Caucasian people, it's kind of like we don't.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about Caucasian, but like that's not an ethnicity. It's not a history.
It's weird that it's all been lumped together. I don't know. That's the weird thing about wokeness too, that
Yeah,
all these disparate people groups are
right,
lumped together on just based on one aspect of their what is their most visual component of
right,
them. But still, it's ridiculous. It's like if we put all the people that have blonde hair into a single category, it's
right.
just silly.
So like I don't know. So that's been one of the things too that's so striking to me. It's not just about the differences in theology and the difference in liturgy and the difference in practice. It's just such a deeply rooted historical uh, land, ethnic kind of feel to it.
Hmm.
Even though I go to an OCA church, so it's very open, it's very ecumenical, it's very like it's very American. Like it's actually interesting. So like here's a perfect example. I just heard from this guy who's my son's church school teacher. Sorry, we're going off on all this church stuff,
Outdoors.
but um, and he was saying that like they have the flag in the front of the church, and a lot of times they'll have the flag around in the cemetery, and they have the flag, which kind of
Flag
coming out
from
of
that country.
no, like the U.S. flag.
Okay.
And part of that was like I let it go, I didn't focus on it too much, but like in evangelicalism that was kind of triggering to me because I'm very non-nationalistic, and like this
Yeah.
is stuff Preston and I talk a lot about. Like he wrote an article like I pledge allegiance and why he doesn't pledge allegiance, and I'm kind of on that perspective too. But this guy was explaining to me that the reason the flag is up a lot was almost like the opposite of why it would be up in an evangelical church, to be like very nationalistic, like we're Americans, like Jesus with a like
Yeah.
M16. Like they were having such national ethnic, I think this is what he said, problems with like so identifying with like certain cultural heritage, that they put the flag up as an American flag almost as like a pushback to
Yeah.
that.
To say this is where we are now, and
Right. And
that's
I was
also
just
part of
like,
our
whoa,
identity.
that's like, so like the flag up as a representation in the front of the Orthodox Church is like a totally different thing
Yeah.
than the flag up in front of like my evangelical church. It's just like that's a really good example of just like it's a totally different world, you know.
It's
It's
really
weird.
cool.
Yeah, it's a trip. Are you I know you were checking out churches at some point. Are you considering Orthodoxy?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I could get my fiance, her name's actually Jen as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could get her on board with it. Like we go to an Anglican church,
Join the club.
and she likes that. Okay, she really likes the pastor there. He's like a younger guy. He's probably about our age, and he's I've been I really love that church in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, but that's like almost like the extent of like how much she wants to be in that religious boat,
Mm,
at all. Like she's grew up in like kind of a restrictive Christian
mm,
background as well, and that I grew up in one as well, and so she kind of sees a lot of it as negative. It's like, okay, so it's like something to be embraced, like there's a good thing there, but don't go too far because then you turn into one of these crazies. That's how she
right.
kind of, I think, um, con- conceives of how this all fits together. It's like good in small doses, but if you like have too much of it, then you immediately become one of these people that are like
Yeah.
crazy and whatever. which I mean, I have some of that in myself as well, you know, where I'm, especially anybody that's very dogmatic about any sorts of points of view. I'm just, that's very, I'm not interested in that anymore. Um,
Right.
but, um, but I do think it's certainly, you know, I see it as a vehicle. I just think there's so much of a spiritual journey cannot be undertaken alone.
Right.
So,
Right. I mean, that's a lot of my, that's the reason I'm not, I mean, largely being baptized and going all the way is, I mean, that's a really complicated and more personal conversation, but the short version is that, like, I don't want to really, part of it is that I don't want to do it until I feel like I'm really free to do it and
mhm,
put it as a priority in our life.
yeah,
And I also just don't want to, I don't want to be so invested in something um that my wife isn't, you know.
right, right,
um and that's a bit of a struggle. Something that's really interesting about orthodoxy that my wife and I got together with our priest and we're talking about, because we were trying to work through some of these issues, was, and it's true, and that Rod Tripp and I, this was like the impetus for our whole conversation that will eventually come out of Randos. But especially in America, and I don't know if outside of America, I'm not sure, but conversions to Orthodoxy are like majorly male, like by a
yeah,
huge degree. Um, and it's such an and the priest was saying that, like, that's his experience, and broadly that's the experience of the Orthodox Church too. And he said that's something that a lot of times they talk about, and they're just like, they don't really know why necessarily that happens. Um, and Rod Dreher's treat thread was a lot about that. But like, it's a super interesting phenomenon, because the church in America, largely the evangelical church, is thought of being as very female driven,
hmm,
and
yeah,
almost negatively said very feminized. And the Orthodox Church is not that way. Like, very often it's male converts that bring their wives along, that either come along kind of lagging 5-10 years later maybe,
yeah.
or never do.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I would guess. I mean, a lot of those converts have some sort of experience with one of the ancient Eastern fathers that brings them in.
The male converts,
Yeah, that, I mean, that's
I think within America, it's probably a combination of things. um I think a lot of time it's probably in America, it's probably people with high openness, but who are also really interested in ideas. I mean, maybe, and maybe this is just my story, you know, it was as I was reading broadly and outside of the prescribed book lists, um, and just kept digging. You know, I'm just digging, trying to figure things out, trying to understand things. Like, at some point, you get you, and especially as you keep going back and back in time, eventually you meet up with some of these Eastern fathers and Eastern people, and I just kept finding just tons of resonance every time I'd read these guys. I'm just like, oh, this is how I've always thought of stuff,
yeah,
and I just never knew it. And so you keep digging and going into that. But what's so weird about Orthodoxy too is that, um, so like, you can get there through that very kind of like mapping, searching, kind of masculine impulse, but Orthodoxy's so feminine, everything about it.
mhm,
Like, um, it's, well, I would just say it's very balanced, is how I would say it. Like, the Theotokos, all the female saints,
yeah.
the aesthetics, I mean, it's the language. I mean, it's very, very,
Well, in the sense of mystery,
that
I think,
too. Yeah,
yeah,
it's just
of not giving definition to every last single thing, and
right.
even some, you know, jealously guarding the mysterious space is something that you can't necessarily fill in.
Yeah, and just space and openness, and even like incense. I mean, all of that stuff is, I don't even mean feminine by like, this is something Preston and I talk about, which I think these things get worked out. Like, when I say feminine, like, Preston, a lot of times he hears the way that he takes that is like that's a cultural stereotype that we have labeled feminine. And I'm
Hmm.
like, no, 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 no. I think feminine is much deeper than that. Like it's like it's a spiritual reality.
Right.
And so when I say something's feminine, I'm not saying like this matches with like a cultural democratically decided projection of what femininity is. I'm saying it's a reflection of a deeper reality that we are in relationship, which may or may not have overlaps with those cultural things.
Certainly.
Um, so I don't know. I'm at such a weird place though, because I mean, I am I'm evangelical in the sense that I'm very outspoken and not shy to talk about my testimony and about what I think and where I am. It's kind of like the sense of like if I've always said if I find a good restaurant or something, and I always heard it said described this way, like if you go to a restaurant, you have the best burger you've ever had in your life, and I
Yeah.
care about someone, why wouldn't I you should go check out this burger. Like it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like I want to share that with people. So I'm very willing to talk about orthodoxy in that regard, but yet I also have come into a greater understanding, kind of moving out of my propositionalism to say, like, people are so much more complicated than just our ideas. It's not as easy as, like, orthodoxy makes sense in all these ways. You should become orthodox. It's not that easy.
Hmm.
Like, I almost said this the other day, like, um, my daughter's wanting something else again. I'm gonna have to,
Oh,
I'll
no
have
worries,
to go
man.
pretty quick. But just a sec, okay? Um, I was saying that um, I almost am to the place where I think that I probably would say that I think it's best that people stay in the tradition they were raised in. Like I don't think everyone should convert to Orthodoxy. Um, I think, I think if people want to, maybe, each should be fully convinced in their own mind. Like I shouldn't say don't. I'm not going to say that either. But I think it's just much more complicated than just like accepting a new mental framework. There's who we are and what we know in our culture and history is so much more complicated than that. Like for me, someone who was raised in evangelical mutt somewhat, I'm like, what is my spiritual tradition?
Well,
It's kind of always been an a la carte, pick whatever you want, go to whatever church you want. Like there isn't one really, and so it's kind of hard to stay true to that. I don't even know what it is.
I think that a lot of people switch because they have certain wounds coming out of,
That too,
you
for
know,
sure.
and so yeah, so there's again there's something about and at least coming into a new tradition that they can experience some of the same truths in ways that aren't necessarily tagged to some of those old hurt feelings, maybe.
Right, and I mean that's also an understandable impulse. I mean, part of me, sorry, I feel like my mic's messing up. Part of me is kind of like, and we spoke about this a little bit with Rhett and Link, or Jeff has said this, and part of me, and I have some of that too. Part of me is like, those negative reasons aren't as good as positive reasons, but yet I don't know. Everybody's where they're at. Like something Jeff said in our conversation with Sam about Rhett and Link, which I really resonate with, is that everybody is, in as much as you can and as you're able, if you're telling the truth and not lying to yourself, everybody's journey is their own. And in as much as you're not lying and self-deceiving, whatever you need, you need. Like I don't think there's a universal stamp or formula that of what everyone should be doing.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's like with the truth thing. I think if you pull on a truth thread, a thread of truth, it's always going to lead you somewhere good eventually. But if this is the whole individualism versus being part of a tradition too, like
Yeah.
you're if you it can lead you in some. It's gonna be it might not be the most fun path to take though.
Yeah.
And by yourself you're going to probably lead you're going to come across a lot of hurdles that are maybe going to make you stop. It's easier with the help of a tradition to kind of push through. So
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, the I think maybe the most dangerous, but yet maybe necessary and hard place to be is in kind of the. It's almost funny that like the spiritual but not religious, the nuns, the people who still are spiritual but don't affiliate with any religious tradition, like that almost seems like just the natural progression from like Catholic, Protestant, mainline churches, more and more disparate, more evangelical, kind of non-denominational.
mhm.
Well, you might as well keep going to just like the completely individual, like you're
Yeah,
spiritual, but you have no tradition. Well, that seems like the progression.
yeah,
Um,
and that seems exactly what has happened. And you know, if you have a conversation with anybody, that seems to be like, and you poke beneath the surface, it's very hard. You don't really find that many people that don't have some sort of religious impulses underneath the surface, no matter what
yeah,
they, and Paul points this out a lot too. But it's like it's because the thing is, if you get rid of it completely, if you go full materialist, man, it's a rough place to be. You go,
I don't even buy it. I mean, really, like this, and this is even like the conversations with people that are nihilists. And maybe this is condescending for me to say that, but like everybody says they struggle with nihilism. And I had this conversation with Julian like pretty early on when he and I met. And I just said, like, I don't think anyone's a nihilist. It doesn't even make sense to me. Because nihilists, or I was listening recently to, you know who TJ Miller is? He was on,
comedian,
yeah, he was on
yeah,
Silicon Valley and he's on Deadpool and stuff. He was saying, because he's a nihilist, he'll talk about theology a lot, self-identified nihilist. But even like he was talking to this guy recently, and I was watching it, and he said, but he's a positive nihilist because he just thinks whatever is good for people or whatever makes him happy or he has this is what's interesting. This is like the Rene Girard kind of cultural post-Christian smuggling, or Tom Holland is like, you're the most Christian nihilist I've ever seen. Because like there is nothing intrinsic to nihilism that would say that. Like I remember my conversation with Julian is he would say like sometimes, I think it was with Julian or somebody was saying, like they had thoughts when they were struggling in this meaning crisis and feeling nihilistic, like I should just kill myself or I should jump off my cliff. And I
mhm,
said, the thing that people never challenge themselves or think with is like, if everything is meaningless, why kill yourself? That's
yeah,
meaningless too. Go eat a cake, like
yeah, yeah.
go work out really hard. If everything is meaningless and so therefore you're depressed and don't want to do anything, your whole thing is self-refuting.
Yes, but it's hard to find any system of knowledge that isn't self-refuting.
That's why systems suck. That's why I
Yeah,
love Gabriel Marcel.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think when people use that moniker nihilism in a certain sense, there's a kind of if you're self-professing to the world that you're nihilistic, you're definitely wanting to. Um, you're advertising some sort of wounding, I think, of like a sense of like I crave this meaning,
Hmm.
and yet it's not there. So I'm taking this kind of radical step in the opposite direction, where I'm trying to pretend that I'm embracing that there is no meaning. But even that sort of move is a recognition of the fact that something in me is screaming for this meaning to be present, and I can't put it together. I can't put the pieces of the puzzle together. So I'm saying that there isn't one. But yeah, it's really hard. And I mean, in my own sort of coming out of like, I would say it's I don't know, it's like nihilism in some sense is an extreme sort of gnosis, or um, saying of like just like limitations of our knowledge, which in some sense there's a
Oh,
truth in that, right?
yeah, for sure.
I think it's like maybe there's a meaning, but I can't access it. Is part of what I think is underlying that that jargon or behavior. But I found in my own life that, there's some of these, this idea of that, things are meaningless, kind of played itself out in weird kind of different areas. Like it would just, like it would just be like a certain part of my life I was essentially acting as if
Mm.
it was meaningless, and it's as a way of, there's all sorts of reasons for doing that, but one of the benefits is the highs and the lows of whatever is going on there affect you less,
Yeah.
with the, like um say like your job's not going well. Within that little frame, you can say, well, this part of my life has no meaning, this, you know or you're in a relationship that's not going well, or
Yeah.
your relationship to your parents or whatever. Like you can just
Yeah.
put it into this little box of nihilism and go,
Yeah.
I'm out, drop the mic,
Your
walk
your
away.
your existential defense mechanism. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was kind of surprised to uncover that that's actually something I had done in all these little boxes. It was just like a way of like, and then I could always re-engage if things were looking up. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna now pretend like it means something. It's
Yeah.
very much
That
just a tool that's you're grabbing off the shelf, that's been crafted by the culture you're in.
right. Oh man, that's why I don't know, the tell the truth thing, so important. I think it's almost like, I don't know, that's like it's my go-to practice thing for everyone. It really is. And I don't know exactly, there's more thinking I need to do, but I should probably go soon. On like I've just been marinating on the subjective objective thing. That thing when it
Yeah.
comes to beauty is that one seems easiest
Yeah.
and most clear, but I think it's also related to truth, and it's kind of related to that idea that I've been tossing around of like, when you the way I think in tweets sometimes, because I built that habit, I think, when I was on Twitter. But it's like, if you until you submit to your subjective truth, you'll be unable to submit to objective truth. That's the way that I've been thinking about it.
Hmm.
And it's not that it's almost like an acknowledgement of like, until I tell the truth about what I really believe, I can't even submit to the truth that's outside of what I currently believe.
Right, because your own relationship to truth is so mucked up. Like
Yeah,
it's you can't you gotta polish the mirror before you can see anything in it.
right, right. And so that's why I
And
think telling
everything you are experiencing comes first through your subjectivity.
it's inescapable, right? And so
Yeah.
like that's even why like sometimes the hardcore apologetic type tribal fighting for objective rational truth people, I'm just like, cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Let's tell the truth
But
first.
that's like the whole thing with the people, like with Carl and his takedown on, postmodernism, which
And
in some sense
buffoons.
I totally agree with, which is like,
Yeah,
okay, you're
yeah.
making this claim, that there is no absolute truth, and that itself is an absolute truth. And it's like, no, 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 no.
That's
it's way
my
more
least
subtle than.
Yeah, that's my least favorite, like, rationalist gotcha, probably.
Well, I mean, it's one I bought into, and I think there's something true in that, because I
Yeah,
think there are some postmoderns that take that point of view. They will say, okay, you can deconstruct everything except this one little thing. They'll have
it's the
this little
yeah,
this that they
it's the
hide underneath.
it's the true relativists that, like, deny hierarchy,
Yeah,
that
and
deny, like, the yeah,
that's rife everywhere.
yep.
Um, but what you are saying is that there is something about subjectivity that always limits, that that puts a frame around truth and limits our ability to see it. And I don't think
Definitely
that, no,
propositionally.
yeah, nobody would even deny that. Everybody knows that. But it's weird that in these, when we get into this realm of language, like for instance, in that case, it's just a syllogism, right? The claim that there is no absolute truth is a claim to absolute truth. you
Right.
know
Right.
logic refutes itself, done.
Right.
But the problem is logic itself is something of our creation. It is like this sub reality that is useful, but only for judging entities within that, that are created within that frame. Like we exist in this larger reality that none of us have complete access to. Like, so it's like these things like logic, they don't they're just not good. They're useful tools. They're just I don't know, like there's this weird idea that we can use them to describe the whole world, that it's just, I don't
Well,
know.
it's the elevation of our conscious articulated knowledge to a place it was never meant to be, which um I don't know. I really do still like, and this is a lot of what Tripp and I talk about, the idea of propositional knowledge as potential. I think if we really, and that's what I was telling him, I think if we really took Vervaeke's 4Ps and moved propositional knowledge to like its own category of potential, like it's fine, it's
But
valuable,
here's
it's
the, but
good.
here's the other thing. This is one of Barfield's big point is none of those things are really separate. Like even like
Yeah,
Vervaeke's
yeah, yeah.
idea that you can separate any of them and call them knowledge still is ridiculous. Like it's just what
Procedural
knowledge
is
what knowledge do you have
participatory.
access to that's
Yeah.
just propositional? You just, well, how, it just
Hmm.
becomes ridiculous. There's
Because we're
all of it.
embodied. Yeah,
But the thing is, it actually isn't knowledge until there's a unity between those different things, right?
yeah,
And we have this weird hierarchy where we think of knowledge as propositional knowledge devoid of all the other three, which would pollute it.
yeah,
And so that's the weird thing that we can't seem to resolve.
yeah. No, but I think that's true. That's an awesome way to close. I got to make dinner.
Cool. Well, this was
Well,
fun. I guess send my way when you get a chance.
I will send it to you. Do you we'll maybe share with friends and see what people think or something.
Cool.
All right. Sounds good. As
All
always,
right.
it's fun to talk to you, Clark.
Yeah.
I like them. They look good. They're nice.
Yeah, they help me see.
Well, might as well look good too. I have such different aesthetic tastes. Like I picked out my wife's glasses, which she thinks are just ridiculous, but I love them. And because they're more like I'm more of a, in general, Pete Holmes always describes people as either like look at me's or I see you. Like he says, there's
Uh-huh.
two different kinds of people. There's like I see you people, and there's the look at me people. And I tend to be more of a. I mean, I see people too, but I'm definitely not afraid of attention. And so,
Yeah.
and so, like, I got her these. She has like these gold rimmed, but they're like bigger glasses, and they're like more. I don't know. I think they're awesome because they're a good balance because they like pop and they look cool, but they also work with almost anything. They can be
Uh-huh.
neutral, but they kind of simultaneously pop but are neutral. And she's just like they're the kinds of things that she just never would have picked because my wife is not a look at me person. She wants to not be seen at all. She never wants to be the
Yeah.
center of attention.
That's kind of how I am. Like the more things are like drifting towards me as being the focus, then yeah, the more uncomfortable.
Which is
So
so funny. I don't know. That's probably outside of like theology and food discussions, just like human psychology and personality stuff is so endlessly fascinating to me. Like I just think it's so crazy how different we all are. It's unbelievable.
yes, it's I can't wait to find out what it's all about.
Yeah, it's wild. I'm so fascinated with people. Like I really am. Like I love people so much because like when I find out, because most of my life I just projected myself on other people, so I'd be confused when people would do things. I'm like, why are you doing that? That makes no sense. And then all of a sudden I figured out just how different people are slowly. It happened over time. And now I'm just like, when I see that kind of stuff now, I just get so excited. I'm just like, that's so crazy. So crazy how different we are.
Yes, I mean, like it's weird how like even in the ways we're different, though, they're also reflections of a similar underlying motivation.
Oh,
And
totally.
just it's like a different strategy for trying to get the same place, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's it's that whole, the expression of the infinite is also infinite. It's just like people are infinitely complex and similar and different. Like it's kind of like someone on the Discord recently, and this is most people in my life, and they get frustrated with me, especially like more fundamentalist type people, is like Kale was saying something. He's like arguing with Luke. He's like, is it this or this? And then he's like, Luke, yes. I'm just like, and that's,
That reminds me, was it you that sent that podcast out the other day? It was both and
yeah, for sure.
great
Yeah.
name for podcast.
Which is and
Yeah,
that episode
both
was
and.
great. I loved it.
Oh, it was really good.
I don't know. It's I just love when I get exposed to stuff I don't know or don't understand. It's exciting to me. Like I love it. You know, it's not threatening to me. It's just like, oh, it's like fun. It's like the world is a playground. You know, it's an adventure.
Yeah, and it's curious. I feel like, yeah. Oh, well, actually, I'll save that. I'll save that comment for another time since we're wrapping up.
All right. Yeah, we'll keep talking forever. All right. And I'm just gonna put this out there. I want this like PBK Discord world to just transition into like me traveling around with my family. So I'm gonna come visit you someday.
Yeah, man. Anytime you're in Atlanta, man.
It'll be fun. We
Cool.
can go on a Love Is Blind tour and like get a
Yeah,
bus.
man. I'm gonna. I'm really fascinated. I'm gonna go watch it. I'm sure I could talk Jen into it.
It's
So
fun. I
she's
like it.
always like, yeah, okay. I'll watch it. I'm interested to compare notes on those things.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Peace, man.
Sweet. Take it
All right.
easy.